Okay, let's have your hands and eyes looking at the smart board. We need to continue where we left off on our Cornell notes when we were talking about food webs and food chains last Thursday. And I realized after you left class that we forgot a little part of the three types of consumers. So if you can get that part of your notes out, let's just say three types of consumers over to the left side. You've listed your herbivore, your omnivore, and your carnivore. We need to add in about scavengers. So for scavengers, it is a subtype of carnivore. So it's going to be sneaking in here right underneath carnivore. So if you have room, find some room, draw an arrow to it. Underneath carnivore, you're going to want to write scavenger. Okay. So a scavenger feeds on the bodies of dead animals. So scavenger feeds on the bodies of dead animals. And some examples might be a catfish or a vulture. And you might see those along the side of the road. So make sure that you add in here underneath carnivore that scavenger is a subtype of carnivore. So it's a carnivore because it feeds on the bodies of dead animals like catfish and vultures. So we needed to make sure that we got that in there. Okay, so let's continue talking about food chains and food webs. The last thing that we had talked about was food chain. And we said that a food chain was a series of events where one organism eats another for energy. We're always going to start with the sun because the sun is going to give us solar energy that starts that whole movement, right? The whole flow of energy. So the solar energy then is allows the producers to perform photosynthesis. So that way that they can make their own food, and then it is passed on to the different consumers. We talked about how the primary consumer is the first consumer in a food chain because it eats the producer. So a primary consumer is most likely going to be a herbivore, or it could be an omnivore because it's going to have to eat a plant. And then you have a secondary consumer that's going to be next in your food chain, and that's going to eat your primary consumer. And then last in your food chain, you'd have your tertiary consumer. That's the top of the food chain, and that's going to eat your secondary consumer. You always want to follow things up at the very end of your food chain with a decomposer. Okay. Because we said that decomposers break down waste and dead bodies. Okay, so dead organisms. So let's fix that on that first page. Instead of raw, we want to say dead organisms. So that's on the first page of notes that we took. So breaks down waste and dead organisms. So we need to fix that. So fix that on the very front side, the very first page of notes we took. You had decomposers, they break down waste and dead organisms. Okay. So now that we've reviewed what a food chain is, we need to talk about a food web. What's a food web? And I'm sure most of you will need to start a new template for your Cornell notes. So get out a piece of paper, get out another piece of paper, quickly make your template. I don't care if you have straight lines. Mine aren't going to be that straight, but I'll do my best, and you just do your best. So get out your pieces of paper, make your template. Okay, you're going to want about 3 fingers from the red line that's on the left side of the page to draw this vertical line. And then about 4 fingers or hand, you'll know how much you need by now to write your summaries. I want you to put that at the very bottom of your page, about 4 fingers or a hand, and draw a horizontal line across the bottom of your page. Okay, so once you're finished with that, just wait for everybody to catch up. Miss Burke, if you need to hit pause right now, then we can do that and wait for everybody to be ready. Okay, so now that you have your template all made up, let's continue talking about uh, food, a food web. So over to the left of your vertical line, we're going to say food web. Okay, so a food web, we're going to say, consists of many overlapping food chains. Okay. So we're going to say that this has a more realistic way to show the flow of energy. So a food web, it consists of many overlapping food chains, and it's a more realistic way to show a flow of energy. Okay. Let's take a look at the picture in your book just for a moment. This is on page 44 in your book, in your science books. And this is not what I wanted to show you. This is your picture of your food web. And you see that there's all kinds of arrows going different ways. You have your producers, and you have an arrow that shows how the energy is flowing from the producer to the cottontail rabbit. So the rabbit is eating that grass and getting energy from the grass. Then the rabbit, you see an arrow from the rabbit to the red fox. So you can trace that flow of energy. It's going from the rabbit to the fox. And because that energy is flowing from the rabbit to the fox, we know that whenever the fox eats the rabbit, that fox is getting the energy from that rabbit. You can follow this up and see that this is a food chain, a simple food chain. So you have your producer, your primary consumer, and your secondary consumer. And you can tell that all of this together makes up that food chain, or that food web. It's made up of all these little simple food chains. Here's another food chain. You have your producer, which would be the grass. Then your field mouse eats the grass. And your field mouse could also be eaten by the garter snake, or your field mouse could be eaten by the red fox. So this is a chain going from the grass to the mouse to the snake. And this is another simple chain from the grass to the mouse to the fox. So you also see how they're starting to overlap, because you have the picture of the mouse, but you have two arrows branching off of it, because that mouse could give its energy to the fox or to the snake. And so this is how that web works. When you do your project this week on making your own food web, you're going to have to know where these little simple food chains are overlapping. You're going to have to design your food web and show it with the arrows, and the arrows are going to indicate that flow of energy. So you're going to have arrows that point to, that trace where this energy is going. So it's like if you ate a chicken nugget for lunch, that chicken nugget is right beside you, the arrow would be pointed towards you, because that chicken nugget is giving energy to you so you can be able to function in the afternoon and have energy to get through the rest of your classes. So you see that the grass that the field mouse is eating is giving that field mouse energy. So that arrow is then pointed to the field mouse because the field mouse is getting that energy from the grass. Just like this arrow is pointed to the snake because when the snake eats the mouse, the field mouse is giving its energy to that garter snake. So that's a simple food chain within this big, massive, more complicated food web. Okay, now some of the organisms may play more than one role. So you can say that organisms play more than one role. In the food web. So organisms play more than one role in a food web. Okay, so you might have an omnivore that can play two roles. So you might say an omnivore, for example, you have a mouse. Okay. If the mouse eats grass, then you know that you have the mouse is then a primary consumer because it's serving as a herbivore at that point. But you might also have a mouse that's going to eat a grasshopper. And if the mouse is eating the grasshopper, then it's playing the role of a secondary consumer. So let's do a few simple food chains to show you how this would play out, how they can switch roles in a food web. So first, you might start with your sun, because your sun is what gets that ball rolling. The sun gives its solar energy to the producer, let's say the grass. And then we can say the grass gives its energy to the mouse. The mouse gives its energy to a snake. And the snake gives its energy to an owl. And when the owl dies, we know that it has to have a decomposer. So let's say fungi. Okay. You also might have another food chain where you have sun, gives its energy to the grass so it can make its own food. Then you might have a grasshopper that eats the grass. You might have a mouse that's going to eat that grasshopper. The snake that will eat the mouse. Okay, we'll go on this next line here. The owl that's going to eat the snake, and the fungi that will take care of the owl once it's dead. So you start seeing things that are overlapping. You see, oh, here's the snake and the owl and the fungi. Okay, that's similar, but I know that the mouse is playing a different role in this food chain because it's going to eat the grass, and we said that that was an example of a primary consumer. And then we see that this mouse is now being a secondary consumer when it eats the grasshopper because the grasshopper is the primary consumer in this food chain and is eating the grass. So you could also tell that the grass is giving its energy to two different things. So whenever you're doing your food webs this week, you're going to say, okay, grass. I know it could give its energy to a mouse and it could give it to a grasshopper. So you would just have one picture of grass and you're going to want to show some arrows that are going to both to the mouse and to the grasshopper. And that's kind of how those food webs are starting to be developed. Okay, we're going to stop here and then have Miss Burke play part 2 of this lecture.